Welcome back to Kill A Mockingbird, Chapter 7. I want to do a couple things here. One, give you an overview of the chapter, and two, talk about the knot hole and the things that were left in a knot hole and what it says about Boo Radley. So, Chapter 7, for the most part, talks about is about the knot hole. But first, we get this Jim tells Scout what happened when he went back for his pants. And what happened was his pants were laid across the fence as if someone was expecting him to come and retrieve them. And they had been sewn where he had torn them. But not like someone who was good at sewing would sew them, but someone like Jim, someone who doesn't have any practice at sewing, somebody, to use a stereotype, that sews like a boy. And so this made Jim think about things. And then school starts, and Scout's in the second grade, and it's a little bit better than the first grade, but still trying. Jim is learning. He's in the seventh grade. He's learning about the Egyptian period. He's trying to walk like an Egyptian. And he says that they invented all of the important things in life, including toilet paper and embalming. On their way home, though, they start to notice things being left in the knot hole again. First they see some twine, ball of gray twine. Then they find some soap figures that are carved. That looks both like a boy and a girl, like Scout and Jim. Then they find some chewing gum, and then a spelling bee medal. And Atticus, they show it to Atticus, and Atticus thinks that someone has lost it. He says that long ago, before they were born, in Macomb, the schools used to have spelling contests and awarded medals to those who won. And then they find, lastly, an aluminum knife and with a watch. The aluminum knife, the watch no longer works, but Atticus says it probably would be worth $10 if it were brand new, because the watch is pretty valuable. It's Scott thinks it's white gold. The kids, Scott and Jim, start to write a letter to whoever's leaving the stuff in there. Jim knows it's a Mister. Scott doesn't. Says, "How do you know it's a man? It might be Miss Maudie." And of course, Jim says Miss Maudie can't chew gum. And so they leave this letter, or are going to leave this letter. "Dear sir, we appreciate it. No, we appreciate everything which you have put in the tree for us. Yours very truly, Jeremy Atticus Finch." And he won't know. Scott says he won't know who you are if you sign it like that. Jim erased his name and wrote Jim Finch. I signed Jean Louise Finch, Scout. So the next day, on the way to school, they're going to leave it in a knot hole, and they find that the knot hole has been covered up in cement. Someone had filled our knot hole with cement. They go and wait for Mr. Nathan and ask him if he had done it. And Mr. Nathan, did you put cement in that hole down the tree yonder? Yes, he said. I filled her up. Why'd you do it, sir? Tree's dying. You plug them with cement when they're sick. You ought to know that, Scout. And then Jim asks Atticus if the tree is dying or whether it's healthy. And Atticus says, well, looks as healthy as you. And then he says, Mr. Radley said the tree's dying. And of course, Atticus, being Atticus, responds, well, maybe it is. I'm sure Mr. Radley knows more about his trees than I do. And Jim stands on the porch looking at the tree for a long time, and Scout notices that he has been crying. And that's how the chapter ends. It's really about this knot hole. And this knot hole is a symbol for communication. Someone is trying to communicate with the kids. And that someone is probably Boo Radley. We know that because it's Mr. Nathan Radley who fills the hole. And he fills the hole because he realizes that, something's going on, that someone's been leaving stuff in there. What I want to talk about now is really the stuff in that's been left in the knot hole, and what these things actually say about the story, and say perhaps about Boo Radley and what he's trying to do, or perhaps even about Boo Radley's life. Note the first thing he leaves in the tree is chewing gum. Now, chewing gum is one of those things you offer to friends and people who you might just have been acquainted with. You say, do you want a piece of gum? It's sort of a way to start a conversation, or you always offer gum to someone if you have gum in yourself. And the first gum that he actually gives is Doublemint, which is, again, gum. This is during the Depression, so it's a minor luxury. So he's giving them some sort of enjoyment, but Doublemint also might allude to the fact that they're brother and sister, and they're joined. But again, it's an introduction. The next thing he leaves are two Indian head pennies in a ream box, and this actually has a little bit more involved with it. One, you have this idea that Indian head pennies, according to Jim, are good luck pieces. Perhaps they're good luck charm. Perhaps they're protection. And at one point in time, if you wanted to give someone good luck, you might give them a rabbit's foot. But he gives them good luck pennies, two Indian head pennies. Now, there's something more here in the fact that the dates on them are 1900 and 1906, and they probably, Boo Radley collected these and polished them in his youth when they were sort of minted. This is supposed to give us a sort of an age about how old Boo Radley is. He's probably in his 30s according to these pennies, because the story takes place in 1933. The first penny was 1900. If he collected these in his youth, he's probably, again, like in his 30s, mid to probably mid 30s. Also, Indian head pennies went out of production in 1909. So if you had one, you would have collected it and kept it. It tells us also a couple other things. One, he's giving them something of this valuable, something that's no longer in currency. Sort of like Boo Radley, he's been taken out of currency as far as like he's no longer in society. Two, the Indian head penny, as far as the small penny goes, went into circulation in 1859, which is right before the start of the Civil War. Again, this puts us into this idea of the Civil War, the idea of racism. The last thing really to think about this is that if you should look up the Indian head penny on the internet, the picture really is sort of the Lady of Liberty. It's a non-native woman with an Indian headdress on. It's controversial. It's racist in many ways. So it's really not an Indian head penny. It's a woman with an Indian headdress on that's white. Again, this plays into this whole deeper idea of racism in Alabama, in the South during this time period. Next, he gives two soap dolls. And these are carvings of Jim and Scout carved out of soap. This shows a couple things. One, that he's been watching the kids, probably fascinated at some of their games that they've been playing that sort of involve his life, or the fact that they've been trying to actually communicate with him somehow. It also shows you that he has some sort of talent. He's not, he has been doing things with his life. He's not, you don't become talented carver overnight. It takes some time. He actually has something of value within himself that he can do. Next, he gives his ball of twine. And the ball of twine is sort of a symbolism of connection between him and the neighbors. What do you do with the ball of twine? Well, you link it to something. You could use it to make a telephone out of cans. Also, a dream interpretation of twine is a dream book is obstacles that have to be overcome, and these will play out in the fact that the kids will have obstacles very soon that they will have to overcome. The next thing that he leaves is a spelling bee medal. Miss Maldy, a few chapters back, talked about remembering Boo or Arthur Radley as a child, and how he was always sweet and nice, and said the right things. Apparently, Boo was also a very bright child because he won a spelling bee and was rewarded a medal. The last thing he leaves is a pocket watch with a knife, and this pocket watches could be valuable if the watch is ever fixed. A couple things that it symbolizes. One is that the knife um, could be for protection, and the watch is also broken. Time has stopped. Time has stopped for Boo. Boo is no longer in time. He's been taken out of time. He's been taken out of circulation. He's been taken out of the mainstream community of Maycomb. So those are just some things that perhaps the items in the knot hole represent. The knot hole again represents this idea of communication. Boo is trying to communicate with the kids. Mr. Arthur Radley does not want Boo to communicate with the kids for some reason, so he covers the hole with cement. This takes away the actual ability to communicate without any sort of seeing Boo in person. And really, Boo is trying to teach the kids or tell the kids something about himself through the items that he leaves. Note that, again, the theme of prejudice shows up in this chapter. I hope that helps. I'll talk to you again.